Welcome to the Office of the Leader of the Opposition press conference for November 24, 2023. Permit me to introduce today's panel. From my right, there is none other than Mr. Kemraj Ramjitan, Member of Parliament and leader of the Alliance for Change. To his right, Mr. Aubrey C. Norton, Member of Parliament, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and the Opposition. To his right is none other than Ms. Amanzo Walton Desir, Member of Parliament and Shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs. To her right is none other than Mr. Gary Beth, Member of the CEC, and to his right, Mr. Morgan Williams, also a member of the CEC. Welcome. Today's press statement will be read in two parts, and we will have the first part being read by Mr. Kemraj Ramjitan.
Thank you very much, members of the press corps. It is entitled Need for Enhanced Defense Diplomacy. At the outset, it must be stated that the opposition is committed to a unified front on the territorial controversy between Guyana and Venezuela. However, the United Front does not absolve us the responsibility to highlight the shortcomings in government's response to the threat at our western border. The government needs to be genuine in upkeeping the consultative and inclusive process so that stakeholders, including the opposition, do not feel the need to resort to public forums to air their views. Guyana's territorial integrity is executed via a three-pronged approach: international, national, and legal. Over the past 6 decades, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana has depended and continued to depend firstly on defense diplomacy, underpinned and driven by Article 37 of our Constitution, and in particular, the practice of sovereign equality, inviolability of frontiers, territorial integrity of states, peaceful settlements of disputes, and non-intervention in internal affairs of other states. Together with provisions of Articles 1 and 2 of the Guyana Constitution, the borders of the Republic of Guyana are therefore sacrosanct, indivisible, inalienable, and non-transferable. Article 2 of Guyana's Constitution lays out the borders of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and only a national referendum can change those borders. For context, the government of Guyana at the time deeply entrenched the borders of Guyana in the nation's successive constitutions. The record shows that the successive PNC governments and later coalition government were always concerned with protecting the territory this nation received at its independence. Abhorrently, recent suggestions by a member of the current government about giving away some of Guyana's territory is anti-nationalist and anti-patriotic. To be clear, the Constitution of Guyana does not provide for giving away any of Guyana's territory except by a national referendum. Therefore, no president, nor vice president, nor cabinet minister has any constitutional authority to negotiate away any of Guyana's territory. Secondly, at the international level, defense diplomacy requires continuous diplomatic interactions by Guyana's diplomats and special envoys across regional and global capitals and international institutions. The success of this type of action manifests in strong international condemnation and possible intervention by friendly states on Guyana's behalf, which acts as a counterweight against Venezuela. In short, such actions would give an aggressor cause to pause. The government of Guyana should immediately consider this type of diplomatic action instead of its current convoluted approach. Thirdly, underpinned by Article 33 of Guyana's Constitution, arose the concept of total national defense. This is where the total national, material, and human resources are organized and deployed to achieve total national defense and defense of the country's territorial integrity against external aggression. This article of the Constitution commands every citizen to defend Guyana. The government is advised to let the citizens know that defending Guyana's territorial integrity is the duty of all citizens and not exclusively that of the Guyana Defense Force. In this context, the government is further advised to tap into and harness all the human resources available in this country in the defense of Guyana. The unity approach in defense of Guyana does not end with the parliamentary speeches. It continues until the nation state of Guyana is returned to territorial safety. Finally, defense diplomacy by itself is insufficient. The government of Guyana must provide the Guyana Defense Force with adequate and operable defense assets so that it can effectively defend the nation state. Thank you very much.
The need for a more robust and programmatic diplomacy. It is generally agreed that Guyana faces grave danger to its territorial integrity and sovereignty as a result of the mobilization of military forces on its borders by its western neighbor, and in particular by the proposed referendum on December 3rd. The opposition is convinced that the danger and challenges are not like previous ones. It is clear from the declarations of senior officials of the Maduro administration, including the military, that the Bolivarian Republic has firm designs on the Essequibo, our richest county, and they are prepared to use ultimate measures to annex our territory. The opposition further believes that this nation will have to respond to these threats and challenges in various ways, because effective diplomacy is the best option. But not just diplomacy in the traditional sense, but one that is programmatic, robust, and sustained, and which can succeed in blunting Venezuela's aggression and revanchist tendencies. We have succeeded in doing this in the past. We must succeed again. Failure is simply not an alternative. Yet even as we prosecute our cause against Venezuela, our diplomatic efforts must take account of the complex international environment, which is characterized by great power conflict, transformational changes in the international system, environmental imperatives, and two distracting and ominous crises in the Middle East and the Ukraine. Our diplomacy must be good and skillful enough to break through these barriers and get our message across. The narrative of our survival must be well crafted and so tailored that we can reach those governments and people whose support is critical to our survival. A diplomatic program of a small state such as Guyana must involve measures aimed at securing the confidence of its people, especially those who are on the frontiers of Venezuela's aggression. Our people must see that its government is proceeding in a confident and measured manner to strengthen alliances with regional states and organizations and deploy where necessary Guyanese of international standing who are familiar with the corridors of power of important states and who best can sell the narrative of Venezuelan aggression. Guyana could, for example, deploy envoys to the member states of CARICOM to reinforce the support it already has and create a great understanding of the dangers and challenges we face from Venezuelan aggression. In particular, it is well past the time that an envoy to the region dispel the notion that Guyana is in any way a threat to the peace and stability of the Latin American and Caribbean region. In this context, states such as Mexico must be of importance to us. So is Brazil. Envoys must be deployed to the western capitals and those states which have considerable influence with Caracas, such as Russia, Cuba, and the People's Republic of China. To be clear, such envoys must not necessarily have to be sent from Georgetown, but from embassies we have in the neighborhood of the states concerned. The opposition strongly believes that we must take advantage of such multilateral forums as the UN, the OAS, and the African Union. The UN in particular must be an important instrument to keep the international community abreast of the threat we face from Venezuela's spurious claims to our territory. Our presence on the Security Council must be critical in this regard. A programmatic and sustained diplomatic program must seek to open and sustain lines of communication with key officials in the government and foreign ministries of important states. Such lines of communication must be at all important levels, including the head of state, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and other senior officials who are important in the formulation and implementation of foreign policy decisions. Guyana must have more high-level meetings with the officials of key states which have links with Venezuela. Cuba has been helpful to us in the past with the controversy, and there is no reason why we should not seek their assistance in getting Venezuela to moderate its behavior. Colombia is another country with which Guyana should have high-level meetings. Our relations with Colombia have been a critical factor in prosecuting our case against Venezuela in the past. The opposition believes that the foregoing diplomatic program can only succeed if it is subserved by a public education program which educates the Guyanese people on the facts of the controversy and explain at every turn what exactly our diplomacy is seeking to achieve and why certain diplomatic overtures are being made and objectives sought. In other words, an educated and informed population is necessary for a robust and sustained diplomatic outreach and program. This sustained diplomatic program must involve all segments of our society. We must seek to take advantage of the skill set of Guyanese who have knowledge of international organizations and whose prestige and international claim can be important to making our case internationally. This must be allied to efforts to tap into the skills of those who have previously played a role in resisting Venezuelan aggression and who understand the wiles of the diplomacy of Caracas. The government cannot take a partisan approach to this matter. On this issue, we must transcend partisan politics. There is need for meaningful involvement in policy formulation and implementation. Though we have agreed to be united on this issue, we will not accept unity for optics alone. It has to be a genuine unity that allows all Guyanese to be educated, mobilized, organized, and galvanized into a force against Venezuelan aggression, which is based on a spurious and ridiculous claim to our Essequibo. The opposition wishes to place on record its dissatisfaction with the ineffective and partisan public education program of the government. There is need for a national task force to formulate and implement an efficient and effective public relations and public education program. It must involve public relations and public education of Guyanese at home and in the diaspora and the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean. It has to be an all-encompassing strategy that raises awareness and support for Guyana. The aim has to be to isolate Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I will open the floor for questions on the press statement.
Good morning, Commissioner Rose and Williams. It's not there's all this can you if you have since reached out to the government following your meetings and all the meetings, especially in terms of what you
That's
there is a lot of feedback.
background
coming
noise.
from your side. There's a lot of background noise.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm asking that since your recent engagements with the government, have you reached out to them to express your dissatisfaction with the way you say they are not engaging the opposition? And what has been the response?
Well, I in fact spoke with the president on the matter, but it wasn't restricted to just meeting out to us. I engaged him and indicated to him that we believe the wider press should be involved. And when I did say that to him, he said they were going to be meeting the wider press to deal with the issue. I understand they did yesterday. I don't have the details. I did express concern about not involving the opposition in the way that it should be involved. I also spoke to the issue of using one Guyana rather than one people, one nation, one destiny. In that regard, he said that, I want to be as precise as that, he said that it is his personal thing, it is not partisan. And I said to him, we see it as partisan. We have a national motto, and we should use the national motto. I think he concluded by saying, let us not wrangle over that. And that was left there. I think I also indicated some approaches that should have been, that could be taken, including a more effective public education program. So we spoke by phone, but we haven't engaged at the level of the meetings, though I know that the Foreign Relations Committee was meeting, and Amanzo will be the best to say what is happening at that level.
Can I have a follow-up, please, Mr. Norton? Beyond yourself and the non-political faces, what resources do you have that you can make available to enhance Guyana's position regionally and internationally, as well as via the media?
Well, first, I want to say this to you. It is incumbent on the government to provide every bit of resources to meet out. I don't think that is a function of the opposition. We were in government before, both as PNC and then as coalition, and on these issues, the government put resources into it. It is not the opposition to put resources. We said we are united on this matter. You are aware that I went out of my way to make it clear to the government that they can have our full support on this matter. And therefore, it follows logically to me that the government has to put the resources. That does not exclude the fact that the opposition has resources, especially human resources, that can be utilized, and they're at the disposal of the government. But your question seems to kind of suggest that we should be providing resources. We have made ourselves available to be involved, but past that, it is the government's responsibility and obligation.
No, Mr. Norton, you seem to have missed my part of my question. I was asking beyond the known political faces, what human resources do you have that you can lend to the process, both at the public relations level as well as the direction of reaching out to the regional and international community?
If you listen to me carefully, you would recognize I didn't limit it to the political faces. In the presentation, I said we should try with all people of prestige. For instance, there is Dr. Barton Scotland, who is not part of the political landscape, but he has the expertise that is necessary. You have Ronald Austin, who was utilized by me as an advisor on the issue. And so there are many persons. You have Dr. Kenrick Hunt somewhere in the world. All of these people could be utilized to help Guyana. So beyond that, the known faces, whatever that means, I think there are many people out there that can be utilized to help Guyana. Janet Bulkan, for instance, is an influential person around the world. I don't see why. We had a former ambassador to Kuwait.
Professor Shamir.
Professor Shamir. So there are a lot of people there that can be utilized, but one has to have the political will to ensure this transcends partisan politics.
I see the hand of Ms. Davina.
Hi, good morning. Mr. Norton, a few questions for me based on your statement. Have you shared your suggestions and concerns with government regarding the bilateral talks with partners and the task force for communication and controversy? So that's my first question. Secondly, you said the opposition, is not involved in the way it should be. Can you please elaborate on that? And finally, based on your talks with government, Sir, are you assured that the necessary responses are in place to respond to any forceful act that may be taken by Venezuela?
Okay, if I shared my ideas in the very first meeting with the president, we shared our ideas and outlined what we thought should happen. A lot of it is in this presentation because we were not seeing the total evidence of it, some of it. And so it was shared with the government. What was the second question?
She asked if you're sure that they...
Yes, you said the position is not involved in the way it should be. I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
Okay. Now, as a opposition, we said to the government, we want to be united on this issue. We want Venezuela to see us united. At the level of the World Court, the opposition was involved and invited to be there. Outside of that, there seems to be no intention of involving the opposition. For instance, yesterday on the president's visit, if you wanted to show a united front, you should have asked the opposition to send a representative or two, so when you talk to people in Region 1, it is obvious to people, it is not just the government speaking, it's the government and opposition. In addition, you are formulating a public education program. The opposition has people with skills that can do that, and people who might not be in the opposition that we have access to. The same is true for a public relations program. And so we would have thought that there would have been the involvement at that level, so that when we formulate the policies and the programs, there would have been policies and programs agreed to by the government and opposition. And again, that will be a manifestation of unity on the ground. What we woke up to is a rally in Anna Regina with the vice president, and then the vice president says he was invited. Now, I've been in politics long enough to know that it would have been orchestrated in a particular way, and then say you were invited. So we are now left to organize in our strongholds to ensure that our strongholds are educated. And then I saw an advertisement for Linden in which Minister Edghill was going to be the person, apart from the fact of me not knowing of his foreign policy and skills and competence in the question of the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. Again, I would have thought the government would have wanted to go out there, particularly in one of our strongholds, with a united front. Clearly, they seem not to want to do that, and that is what I mean. In terms of
Mr. Norton, before you go on, can I just clarify something? You spoke about the measures in which you hope to be a part of. But sir, is there any tangible engagement that you're involved in presently on this part of the controversy with the government, besides the talks and you mentioned the World Court? Is the opposition involved in anything else tangible at this moment?
The Parliamentary Committee on Foreign Relations, there is involvement. The levels of involvement have been so far: one, the President and I engage in; two, involvement at the level of the Parliamentary Foreign Relations Committee. Outside of that, I know of no engagement, much less one that could promote national unity.
Thank you, Dominic. I may just remind you my last question. It was, based on your talks with government, are you sure that the necessary responses are in place to respond to any forceful act that may be taken by Venezuela?
The answer to that question is no. The government has not reassured us anything about responding to the aggression by Venezuela. However, as you're aware, we have persons who are either head of the army, very active in the army. And so from that standpoint, we would have engaged our persons, and they seem to feel that it could be beefed up, but the GDF is prepared to do what they have to do. I don't know if by any chance Gary wants to become involved in this issue.
Well, thank you, Leader. Yes, thank you. Indeed, this whole issue of the defense of Guyana is critical, and from the leader's statement, he did articulate and mention the issue of defense diplomacy and the constituent elements of that defense diplomacy, and the sustained requirement for defense assets so that the nation state can be continuously defended. So the Guyana Defense Force is designed and organized to deal with Venezuela in a particular context. It is underpinned more particularly by that defense diplomacy aspect, which deals with going out to the foreign capitals, identifying our allies, getting strong statements by nation states on behalf of Guyana. That is what softens the Venezuela's position on the issue and allows the Guyana Defense Force to do what it is required to do in that particular instance. Identifying the enemy, delaying the enemy, while international forces comes to Guyana aid via conversation, via demarche, and in the past we've never had troops. But those strong statements allow an aggressor to cause for pause. And I think that is what is missing here. We're seeing a measure out there that doesn't appear to be one that is consistent with good international effort. I saw, for example, the Venezuelan ambassador visiting the National Security Advisor in Guyana. And that's hard for me to conceive what the National Security Advisor could be discussing with the Venezuelan ambassador. Who binds this nation? The Minister of Foreign Affairs can bind this nation. So I believe the government is trying to score, as the leader said, political points, and therefore it represents an aspect of disunity in this effort and not unity in this effort. And that's what I'd add to what you said at this point in time.
Manza was saying on the Foreign Relations Committee, if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Sure.
What is the development?
So thank you. As the Leader of Opposition indicated, the Foreign Relations Sectoral Committee, we have been meeting. We've had 2 meetings so far. I will say that we are not satisfied with the level of cooperation that we are receiving in this regard. We would have proffered ideas as to what the education program could look like. We would have also asked to receive some of the promotional materials so that we, and we've asked that it be shared to our wider MP colleagues group so that we can play a meaningful role in distributing and promoting this educational material. We have not received those to date. What we are seeing are promotional material, educational material popping up across the sites of various government ministers, and members of the public are correctly observing that we are not sharing those. It is because we do not have it to share. And so we hope that by the time this afternoon we could receive those various promotional flyers, the educational programs, the videos, etc., that would have been developed. As the Leader of the Opposition mentioned, the issue of optics and of unity for optics alone, we will not be a part of that. And so we expect that the government will beef up the attempts to involve the opposition members of Parliament, because we stand ready to cooperate. One of the other aspects, if I may, is the lack of information and statistics. As a responsible opposition, we cannot be expected to go out there to parrot certain narratives without the relevant statistical information being provided to us. To this end, we would have, and I in my capacity as vice chairperson for the Foreign Relations Sectoral Committee would have asked the chairperson, Minister Hugh Todd, to provide to us certain statistics as it relates to the migration and number of Venezuelans, etc., their dispersion throughout the country. And we're awaiting those statistics, because that is the basis on which I think we will be able to competently speak to our constituents. So,
Thank you.
It should be mentioned as well that we did indicate to the government, at least through one press conference, that we have to begin to monitor Venezuelans here. We need a better process of ensuring we can weed out to those who are agents. And I recall indicating in that press conference the need for us to ensure that those people are not settled in Essequibo, though we are willing to be humans and accommodate them, but they should be in Berbice and Essequibo and Demerara, rather than us allowing them to accumulate in Venice, in Essequibo, where Venezuela has a spurious claim to our lands.
We also had indicated that we don't want them to be put on the voters list, those who might very well be citizens. I don't know if that was a collective opposition approach, but
yes,
it was. And indeed, halt the registering of citizens out of Venezuela. We believe that there is an electoral agenda, especially in the part of the vice president, and that can bring a lot of dangers in the context of an elections a year or some more away. It is important that all of these taken into. There is another incident which was one that I believe was very wrong, and that was it Tabata was supposed to go give a speech at a school? Yes, our MP Tabata Sarabo was asked by the Parent Teachers Association and the headmistress to go and give a speech on this issue about Venezuela and so on. And I understand that there was then what is called a halt to that. Now this is an MP, and we have put our cards on the table that we would like to be participating and also helping to educate the young children out there. I was there with Anil Nandlal and Priya Manik Chan and former magistrate, Ms. Kim Kite, and yesterday at Queen's College, and they're interlinked with a number of other schools and so on. But the government has to understand that it must be open and inclusive and allow people who are asked by the constituents, whether it's the parent teacher's body or the headmistress, to give a lecture or a talk, that they allow it rather than exclude and delete it. And this is what is irksome and troubling, quite frankly.
Come and lead, if I may.
Yeah.
This whole issue of unity in effort at this point in time in our country is also important. And I want to underscore what the leader of the AFC mentioned. I was invited to be a speaker at a forum today at the Bishop's High School, the Bishop Auditorium. I was invited by that board. And in that, a flyer was prepared. Myself, Minister of the Attorney General, Carl Greenidge, and Dr. Curtin. A flyer was prepared. I prepared myself. I prepared everything to be there, and then I was disinvited. Wednesday evening,
I didn't even know what it was.
I got a message disinviting me to the function, indicating the message said due to circumstances beyond our control. So, in my view, this is political interference, and the government intends to deal with the issue of defense by itself, the issue of national patrimony by itself. When the Constitution demands it is to be not only bipartisan, but it must involve all the electoral officials. The other point I want to make is there seems to be a misunderstanding and miscalculation by the government of the difference between government and governance. The opposition is part of government and part of governance. The opposition comprises electoral officials, persons who are elected by people in this country. There's no measure by any means where the opposition can be left out. And for example, I heard last evening of a high-level visit to Guyana by defense officials. But that kind of information ought to be communicated to the leader of the opposition. It's called confidential communication. His level of security classification is just next to the president, is very high. He has to be involved. He has to be told of these events. He cannot be hearing it from the media. And that is a miscalculation, again, on the part of the government of how to deal with national security, how to deal with national defense, and frankly speaking, how to deal really with diplomacy, both internally and externally. So I hope that it is clear, there's a clear understanding that there's a lot of interference in preventing the human resources that is available in this country to come to bear and bring this whole situation of the Guyana-Venezuela controversy to an amicable end with the involvement of all Guyanese. Let me put it that way. Thanks.
Thank you. I see the hand of Mr. Adam Harris.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to get something clear on an issue that has been bandied about. The Vice President said that he was repeating a statement made by somebody during the oil era about giving Venezuela passage to the Atlantic. I've seen December said he had no recollection of that. Could somebody clear that up for me? And Mr. Norton, you wrote a book on the border issue. Could you say if it was funded by government or by yourself? And are copies available?
The copies are available. It was not funded by government. It was funded from my income, and it is available at present. Now, on the other question, I've checked with all those persons who were involved in the era, and none of them know of any such claim. But you have to remember, it's Barrett Jackdale. He is just divisive by nature. He seems dissatisfied that we agreed to support on this issue and that he didn't get an opportunity to course and go on like how he does normally go on. So he fabricates an issue. I have asked some of our people in research to get up the interview that he is trying to refer to, and we will circulate it to the press. There was no time under the coalition or under the PNC by itself where there was any such suggestion. In fact, Burnham is on record as saying, not exactly in these words, but to concede an inch is dangerous because it will move to a yard. And so I think this is the normal fabrication of Barrett Jackdale. He lives in a world of lies, and he does everything to undermine unity. It is in that context I will put his utterances recently, but they have no fact behind it at all.
Adam, if I may add to that, look, I too have been trying my best to get this bit of evidence that he has been talking about, that since Hoyt's time there was. And I noticed from a certain string that I am a member of, where they are quoting from a certain document. And the document has turned out to be a Venezuelan memorial. Yes. Which then quotes that indeed Guyana had said something. Now, if you're going to bank on your opponent's affidavit or memorial, that has to be shameless. And then when we have you, that is the vice president, and tape, saying that yes, we're going to do and give away and all of that, as if he get the authority. We know he is PPP, and he's Congress, and he's Central Committee and everything. But he must not play the fool to think that he is the country and the Constitution and the Parliament. And then we have this nasty attitude of calling senior politicians, especially AFC members, lowlifes. Most reprehensible, most ignoble. But then he never liked women, as it were. You know? And starting from long before Vashni, this guy has gotten to the state of almost insanity now. And he cussing everybody, and he misquoting, and he even quoting Venezuelan memorials now. No shame.
If I may, in my research, I found no evidence whatsoever to support this claim that the PNC and by extension the coalition later had anything to do with any sort of territory being ceded to Venezuela. What is important to understand is the context and the rules that is being perpetrated on this nation. The Geneva Agreement does not speak to Essequibo at all. Neither does the Geneva Agreement speak to the borders between Guyana and Venezuela, because those things have been settled. The Geneva Agreement referred to this matter as a controversy because something arose from a posthumous letter, and that led to this issue. What Venezuela discovered later is that they could not speak about Essequibo in the Geneva Agreement, they could not speak about the border in Geneva Agreement, so they kept pressing and pressing for bilateral conversation, dialogue with Guyana. And in those bilateral conversations, it was the Venezuelans who kept raising different issues, one of which is whether they could have had an opening to the Atlantic Ocean. That was never raised by any PNC government, and it was rebuffed and rebuked every single time by the then PNC governments. And just to remember, it is the PNC-led government that enshrined in the Constitution the borders and made it almost impossible to change it. So under no circumstance can I even fathom the PNC itself even thinking about such an issue. And as the leader said, Bonham himself spoke about the issue. We wouldn't give them an inch because they'll ask for a yard. So there's actually no evidence. What we do have on the face of the record, and in fact on the video, is one particular gentleman who said we can ease Venezuela into the Atlantic Ocean, and it's hard and impossible for him to step away from that. I just want to join with the leader of the AFC in calling for an apology from the gentleman who referred to an AFC member of parliament as a lowlife. That is reprehensible and should not be allowed to in this country, and there are many agencies that should speak to this issue. And I know MP Amanzo may want to talk about this issue also.
Oh, yeah. You know, absolutely, I do. I want to be very, very clear that this level of misogyny in our politics is unacceptable. This is a female member of parliament that was called a lowlife, my colleague, Mrs. Catherine Hughes. And Barjagdeo must be made to apologize. And I tell you why this is important and it is troubling. For the last 3 weeks, how many women have we lost to violence? Women murdered, whether by intimate partners, found raped and battered. And so for the vice president of this country to treat and to address a member of the National Assembly, a female member of the National Assembly in such a manner, and a former minister of government, to address her in such a manner, we must understand that this type of attitude at the highest levels of leadership directly contributes to what we're seeing playing out today in our society, and it must be condemned. The levels of microaggressions that women in politics face must be condemned. Women are attacked for the way they look, their appearances are spoken about. These are the types of microaggressions that happen that make people like Barjagdeo believe it is comfortable for you to call a female leader of this country a lowlife. And so I expect it to be condemned. I expect it to be condemned by all. I expect to see the Ethnic Relations Commission, in the same manner that they're hounding Mr. Sherrod Duncan, to require the Vice President Barjagdeo to issue an immediate and unequivocal apology to Mrs. Hughes. And I think nothing less will do, because you cannot, at a time when we need our country to be united, be attacking your political opponents in this manner. You cannot, at a time when our women are being slaughtered, encourage the disrespect of our female leaders in this country.
Excellent.
I think we also should ask if when he was speaking and calling people low life, he was in front of a mirror. That apart, I want to address another issue. The vice president seems to be leading a group of people to carry the line that the Geneva Agreement is what reopened the issue. It is totally false. In my parliamentary presentation, I went through in detail and to point out the language in Article 1, which by no chance talk about reopening anything. It was clearly a case of saying the borders were settled, but in the light of this spurious claim,
Tale from the crypt.
Venezuela was invited to provide evidence, which they have not, will not, and cannot. And so it is dangerous for anybody to go down that road. The other thing that one has to recognize, the Geneva Agreement has saved us in the sense that it has put a legal framework that prohibits Venezuela from using military and other forms of aggression. So at this time, we should be focusing on utilizing the agreement in the most positive way and not become involved in partisan politics about talking about it reopening some conflict when it is not true. And so I wanted to put that on record because there are some who are putting out that misinformation.
Leader, if I may.
Thank you.
If I may, Leader. You are absolutely correct about the Geneva Agreement. But another effect of the Geneva Agreement, that the Geneva Agreement checkmated Venezuela. It could not move outside the boundaries of the Geneva Agreement. So it actually checkmated Venezuela, and to that extent, it benefited Guyana. But let me just share also, if I may, Leader, with members of the audience, is that Article 10 of the Venezuelan Constitution describes the Venezuelan boundary between Guyana and itself. And that description of the boundary is subject to arbitral awards that are not nullity. So the Venezuelan Constitution itself provides for its territory to be adjusted via an arbitral award, which happened in 1899. In 1899, there was an arbitral award, and that Venezuelan Constitution, Article 10, Venezuelans are bound by that. Secondly, Venezuela comprises 23 states, none of which is exequable. Thirdly, even in 1811 at Venezuelan independence, the territory of Venezuela was not fixed because they knew there were likely to be arbitration awards and discussions with border controversies that were not finalized. And in their constitution, it is subject to the 1899 award. It is binding in the Venezuelan constitution, and it is binding via the Paris Agreement. And the Venezuelans are very, very conscious of that. So nothing is left except the ICJ matter now, which is dealing with only the validity of the 1899 arbitral award. So I think Guyanese need to understand also that Venezuela's own constitution provides for 1899 arbitration award, and it only has 23 states. Let me just say that in my view, one of the objectives which is not mentioned by the Venezuelans via President Maduro is perhaps to use the referendum as an opportunity to incorporate Essequibo into the Venezuelan constitution. Because up to now, it is not part of the Venezuelan constitution. It has never been. So in my view, one of the purposes of this referendum, which is a soft issue and not necessarily marching of the troops across the border, is to incorporate Essequibo into the Venezuelan constitution, and we have to vigorously oppose that and be mindful of that.
I think as well, if the government was listening and consulting, there are two other things we should have been pushing at this stage. We should be saying to people, the arbitral awards settle it. But we should also be saying to them that before the arbitral award, Guyana not only owned the Essequibo, but also the Orinoco Basin, which means that if perchance the case is lost, and I don't see it being, loss, then we will have to go back to what they call the status ante, the state of the situation before the arbitral award. If we go back there, Guyana will get more land because we had it. The other point that needs to be made, which I have made in my presentation in Parliament, in the very book you were talking about, and Adam Murray showed, you'll have a copy, is that in that arbitral award, Venezuela lost land to Brazil. But not one day has Venezuela said to Brazil, Malo Provost said that, and therefore this land has to be reclaimed. Never did. Because Brazil has the military and other capabilities to deal with them. And so here is a clear case of Venezuela being an adversary and a bully that believes that because Guyana is a small state, it can overrun it. We will use the diplomatic and all our defense capability to defend what is ours, including the Essequibo, which is part of Guyana.
All right. At this, yes, you can go ahead, Ms.
Members of the head table, I'd like to, Julia Johnson, Prime Minister, would like to just throw out the question to you. As Amanda said, she's waiting on probably some of the promotional material to hand out to the rest of the populace. But I'm going to ask you, have you been in touch with your people in the affected regions or the border regions, that's 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, and 9, yourself as a party, and more or less apprising them of all the information at hand, even as you wait for promotional material? How has this been done, and if so, first of all, if it has been done, and how?
We have been, in fact, at our General Council, we dealt with the Guyana-Venezuela territorial controversy. Personally, I can say I was engaging people in Mabaruma, in Bartica, in Port Kaituma, and we were explaining to them the situation and seeking to put them at ease. What we didn't want to do, there was a big debate among members of Parliament. And members of Parliament, some felt we should have gone into the area, etc. And I said to them that there are dangers in that. We were working with the government and we expected the government to operate in a particular way. And they haven't. At the same time, we have had some of our people and non-governmental bodies organizing activities which we were involved in. So we are in contact with them. I can tell you, I got calls from Port Kaituma and there was great fear. And I spent a long time trying to explain to them the basics of geopolitics, the basics of how Venezuela is trying to use it for their internal purposes, and to really bring them to ease. I did it with people in Mabaroma, I did it with people in the Rupununi, because I was getting these calls, and I know members of Parliament and others were doing that. I also believe that the government wanted us to step out, and then they would have said, look, you're talking about unity, but you're gone in a partisan way. Since we were calling for a bipartisan approach, I thought we need to wait on the government and give them the opportunity to work with us. We were putting the proposals in the Foreign Relations Committee. When I spoke to the President, I put it. But I believe they have a problem. I think the President wants to meet out, etc. But you know, Jack Dale, he into that. And so they have a dilemma which they have to deal with.
I want to ask you, because you mentioned it a short while ago in passing, the internal affairs of Venezuela. Do you think this spurious claim to, or the heightened spurious claim to Essequibo is part of Maduro's plan to rule by decree? Because that is likely to happen when the referendum is passed.
I think Maduro finds himself in a position where he is governing a society that is in political, economic, and social crises. So here you are. Then you want sanctions raised. So you went and make a deal that you will do X, Y, and Z to facilitate democratic elections. So on the one hand, you want to facilitate these elections. On the other hand, you have a crisis, so you know the possibility of you winning is distant. To now distract from his internal thing and whip up support for himself, he has turned to this controversy. And it's not the first time it was used in this way. And so I believe that it is aimed at distracting from the internal problems of Venezuela. And I'm glad to see that some of the Venezuelan opposition are coming out and saying just that. It's a distraction. I also believe that Maduro misread the world. He thought that he had made inroads into CARICOM through PetroCaribe, and that he would have related at an individual level to get support against Ghana. As he recognizes that people believe in the legitimacy of the Guyana case and that they are giving us support, and he is in a dilemma, I think he is beginning to retreat. Let us hope that retreat continues and we're able to resolve it by peaceful means.
If I may add in the response to your first question, Ms. Johnson, I'm one of the persons in contact with persons in those regions you refer to, and the feedback is that persons are very uncomfortable that the whole question of indigenous people's security and well-being is obviously overlooked by the government. There are about 96 indigenous titled villages in this country, many of them on the frontier with Venezuela. Of the 96 villages, titled villages in this country, about 87 of them are situated in Essequibo. To sit in Georgetown and to make a token visit to Mavaruma, which is really a safe space, people believe that it is insufficient an indication by a government to the indigenous citizens of this country. You see, not only was the opposition not included in that visit, which is a very important element that was omitted, but you see our indigenous peoples on the frontier in villages like Whitewater, Camwater, Barmita, Arau, Kaikan, Purima, and so on the frontier with Venezuela. They are the point of first contact with any crossover, whether it be aggressive or friendly. And with reports of flyovers of military aircraft in the Yarakita area, people are concerned. With the reports of drones overflying Kaikan in Region 7, separated from Venezuela by a river, people are uncomfortable. We've received reports of persons leaving Northwest and Julia, I'm sure you are familiar with that. Motor vehicles are being sent to Georgetown from Comacom, Mavaruma. Another vessel is going into Port Kaituma, and people are prepared to send their stuff out. The number of aircraft flights have increased to Region 1 particularly. So not only is there no connect between government and residents of the frontier, there is no information being filtered to people on the frontier, and they rely on persons such as myself and others with whom they have direct contact to supply them with whatever information is available. So it is one thing to speak of national unity on this issue. It is another thing to exclude the opposition from the operations and visitations. But it's even worse to overlook the most vulnerable chunk of Guyana's population in this whole issue, the indigenous peoples of Guyana. I believe we number somewhere between 80 and 90,000 in the whole population of this country. And while Guyanese are leaving Region 1 in particular, what it is in fact doing is disrupting that ratio of Venezuelan nationals to Guyanese citizens in the region, which we understand has already been overtaken. The population of Region 1 Guyanese citizens we understand has been overtaken by the presence of Venezuelan refugees or economic migrants, as the case might be. So people are worried. You hear all sorts of things on social media about Venezuelans being prepared to occupy vacant houses, and how homes are being vacated. So I think that part of the national education plan, the awareness plan, a principal part of it has got to target the indigenous population of this country, particularly the indigenous population of this country resident on the frontier with Venezuela, vulnerable to anything that happens across the border. For example, across the border from Yarakita, there are reports that where there never was a settlement before, now one is being created. Structures are going up, hospitals are being built, schools are being built, and so on. Airfields are being built. What do these developments mean for indigenous population on the frontier? How are their lives going to be changed by it? Who is going to tell them? Who is going to be there to stand with them? As opposed to going and visiting people, having meetings with them and saying to them, keep a white flag handy. We believe that that is ridiculous. This is not about surrender. This is about standing firmly in defense of our territory, standing firmly on a plank that says our diplomatic front is strong and solid, and that our security forces have got this one.
All right, thank you.
I hope people get from that the government does not have a program specific for dealing with border communities, and there is need for one.
I think under the coalition government, the military had actually employed Operation Armadillo, which saw the deployment
That's correct.
Yeah.
of security forces to frontier villages for the exact purpose that you alluded to reassure that there's a constant presence and that their security is foremost.
But it's also based on the constitutional duty that we find in Article 33. It is the duty of every citizen to defend the state of Guyana. And we find, though there might be difficulties and challenges about what concretely we do in relation to that duty, that it must be confronted, what it is. I have a team of activists headed by my General Secretary, Sherrod Duncan, who loves to be in the ring, and he's right now there. And he's indicated that some of the people are saying that we can defend as best with certain assets if we have them. All of that ought to be thrown into the pot as to this obligation that we have to defend our country. Not necessarily GDF or police, but we have to start creating civilian defenders. And that is what the duty in a way means under our Constitution.
But of course, Kamraj, you know that is impossible if there's absolutely no communication.
That's right,
on the
that's
frontier.
right, yeah.
And people are looking back at issues. For example, in that area, that Matakai sub-region, that was the home of Papaya Training Center of the Ghana National Service. And then up comes Jagdeo to suggest somewhere that we could settle the migrant Venezuelans in Papaya. That's an insult to the memory of those people who served the Ghana National Service, who served this country, and who expanded, occupied, and defended that territorial area.
Remember the days it came their way?
Let me also deal with the stupidity of Jagdeo. I was looking at his, I don't want to call it press conference, it's ramblings in front of the press. And here a man is trying to say, oh, during the crisis in Guyana, in the 80s, Guyanese went to Venezuela. And so we must now allow them to come to Guyana. First, he misses there's a difference between people from a small state going to a large well-equipped military state and a large military state coming to a small state like ours. That's the first lack of common sense on his part. You are comparing unequals. If Guyanese if the whole population of Guyana goes to Venezuela, it can impact the millions. But if a couple thousand come from Venezuela to Guyana, it can impact. So there is no comparison. And you see his obsession with partisan politics, because he doesn't do any analysis. He roots it straight in the crisis of, let's accept there was a crisis. Does it logically follow now that we should take Venezuelans in large numbers to the point where it affects our national interest? And that is why I believe he's unpatriotic. I always say he's a transactionalist. The only thing that matters is a transaction that brings money. But when it comes to the finer things in diplomacy, defense, he's a complete C. And that is why regularly he ends up abusing, because when it comes to utilizing what is supposed to be the gray matter given to him, he doesn't. And he makes stupid statements like he made about Guyanese going to Venezuela and Venezuela going to Guyana without understanding. Aristotle years ago, I think any child in politics will know, Aristotle said years ago, there is no comparison between non-equals. And here is a man who destroyed many elements of the Guyanese society doing just that. So I don't think we should take him serious.
All right. I don't see any other hands, any other statements just before we close, because we have gone past our time for today. All right. With no other questions being asked on today's press statement, I would like to bring today's press statement to a close. I do hope our viewers and the members of the media to have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Close first, we'll damage it.
Okay.